Thanks for agreeing to the interview today for Driving Multiple Black Dog. Just for the record, can you please give us your name and where you're from?
Yes, my name is Suzanne Carey and I live here in Albury.
Fantastic. Thanks, Suzanne. Or as I'm going to say, Mum, because you are my mum.
Yeah.
Mum, have you had any experience with the black dog being depression yourself?
Not as such, I haven't. I am being treated for depression myself. And I know when I get down how awful it is. I really feel for the people who do suffer dreadfully, and especially for those who feel that there's no other way out than suicide, because I've thankfully never been that low, and I really feel for those people, and I just wish that anyone and everyone involved with it could reach out to either Lifeline or family to help, to get help, because it must be a very hard thing to do.
So you're being treated for depression yourself. How did you notice that you weren't feeling quite right, or can you tell us a little bit about how it came about and what you did?
Well, it came about not long after my husband died, and I was just crying all the time. And initially, I thought that it was just because I'd lost him, and of course, a lot of it was. But as time went on, I started to realise that I couldn't be bothered to do things, wasn't interested in doing things, totally lost interest in life in general. I wasn't suicidal, but I was very down. And when I went to the doctor and told him how I was feeling, he said, "You have depression, Suzanne. That's what you have."
Did that shock you, actually?
Yes, it did. It did, because I thought I was just having a bit of a downer, and quite possibly that's what a lot of people do. But yes, it did shock me to think that I was suffering from a real thing like depression, and it wasn't going to go away easily. I've been on medication since. It was upped at one stage soon after diagnosis, but now I'm fairly stable, I think, sometimes. Yeah, I managed to live a fairly busy life.
So you have a support network available to you, aside from just your treating physician, a support network, so you have friends, family?
I do have friends and family, but I haven't been referred to, and I honestly don't know whether I would go. I haven't been referred to any counsellors or anyone for help. Maybe I wasn't bad enough. I don't know, because I don't know what their criteria is for discerning whether somebody needs to go to see a counsellor. I'm quite sure that had I done that, I might have been able to understand what was going on within me a little better, but for some reason it was just never suggested.
Okay. You mentioned that your own depression began around the time that Dad died, so that was 2002. How long was Dad in the New South Wales Ambulance Service for?
35, 36 years.
A hell of a long time, and he started actually from the ground up, didn't he?
Oh yes, he was a volunteer, and he used to just help out at the station. Then he did his training, and he was an honorary. Then after he finished his plumbing certificate, he decided that he wanted to join the ambulance. So he went through the training and ended up becoming an ambulance officer, and worked his way up through the ranks to state superintendent. Well, I'm sorry, I can't remember the level, but it wasn't the top notch. Regional. Yeah, so it was an interesting life.
In the early days, how did or do you remember Dad receiving any training with regards to some of
I
the
don't,
things that
don't think it was even heard of in those days. I really don't.
It was mainly sort of the paramedical type training that they were given, and
I don't think there was any, not like there is today. You often hear whenever there's a major catastrophe that counselling has been provided. In those days, I think they just had to find their own way. I do remember Kevin coming home one night after he'd been called out, and he wasn't, he didn't come into the lounge room, he went straight in. I went looking for him, and he was standing beside our second daughter's cot. She was only about 13, 14 months or so at the time. He was standing there crying, and I went in and I said, "What on earth is wrong?" And he had just been to an incident where a child that age was deceased, and it really upset him. Now, he very rarely talked about that afterwards, and whether it continued to nag at him, we'll never know. But it must have been a traumatic experience. And nowadays, I wish that what is available now had been available then, because I think it would help all in the emergency services, not just the ambos.
do you remember any other times Dad seeming upset or perhaps a bit distant or being quick to anger in circumstances either through work or at home? Did it impact on him in your relationship and family life in other ways?
No, not really, because he was a very strong man, and he really kept himself to himself a lot, especially when it regards his work. We had a great relationship. There was never any problems. Look, he could have been suffering from some amount of anxiety or stress, but he would never admit to it. And I think that goes for a lot of people who are suffering these days. They don't like to admit to it. And therefore, bringing it out in the open like you and Paul are doing, I think is brilliant, because then more and more people will understand that it's okay, I'll pinch your term, it's okay to not be okay, and it's okay to talk about it. It could be that Kevin never talked about it. I don't know, but he never showed any signs. But no, I firmly believe that what you're doing, getting it out there in the open and making people understand that they only have to ask for help, that it is there if they want it.
You've met Luna, Paul's mental health assistance dog.
Yes.
What was your first impression of her?
Well, I'm a sucker for all animals. I have heard of dogs, assistant dogs, in that regard.
In the American services, because it is quite well known.
Yeah,
in the US about the benefits.
probably more in the American service than in Australia. But yeah, there hasn't been all that much mentioned of it here. There's plenty for medical reasons, like your diabetics and epileptics and so on. But there hasn't been very much about mental health dogs at all. And I think that's a good thing too, that you're bringing that out into the open. It's just a shame you can't cuddle them when they're working.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of people would agree with that, actually. It's the awareness needs to be in the community. Is there anything else that you'd like to add?
Not at the moment. I can't think of anything, but I probably will on the way home.
That's usually how it works.
No, I just firmly believe that what you are doing for mental health and for the mind dogs is just so important. And I do hope that people start to realise just how important it is, A, for the patient who needs understanding, and also for the animal who needs to be understood.